1920 proved we ruined movie theaters forever. In 1920, a movie ticket cost 10 cents. For that day may you enter a world more opulent than any palace you would ever see. Marble columns, crystal chandeliers, velvet seats, and ceilings painted with angels. Then the lights went dark, and the silence began. But here is what no one tells you. Silent films were never actually silent. Every screening had live music, sometimes a lone pianist, sometimes a full orchestra. Every audience talked, shouted, and gasped together. Every theater smelled of perfume, cigarette smoke, and something else entirely. Tonight, we step through those golden doors into the vanished world of 1920 cinema. But before that, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to become a movie star. By 1920, motion pictures had transformed from a carnival novelty into America's favorite form of entertainment. Over 40 million people, nearly half the country's population, attended the movies every single week. Theaters had evolved from cramped storefront Nickelodeons into magnificent picture palaces that rivaled European opera houses in their grandeur. But the experience of watching a film in 1920 was nothing like today. There was no sound coming from the screen. There were no previews, no popcorn, no assigned seats. What existed was something stranger and more magical, a ritual that combined live performance, visual spectacle, and communal experience into something the world had never seen before. This is the forgotten art of silent cinema. The movie theaters of 1920 were designed to make you feel like royalty, even if you had arrived straight from a tenement apartment or a factory floor. The picture palace phenomena had begun just a few years earlier, when theater owners realized that grander buildings attracted larger audiences willing to pay higher prices. By 1920, cities across America competed to build the most extravagant movie theaters imaginable. The Rialto in New York seated over 1,900 people beneath a ceiling decorated with clouds and cherubs. The Chicago Theater featured a grand lobby modeled after the Palace of Versailles. The $1 Million Theater in Los Angeles, named because of its construction cost, boasted over 2,000 seats and an exterior covered in terracotta sculptures. These buildings were not merely large, they were overwhelming. Entering a picture palace in 1920 meant passing through brass doors into lobbies larger than most homes. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings for stories high. Marble staircases swept upward to balconies and mezzanines. Uniformed ushers in military-style jackets guided patrons to their seats with flashlights and white gloves. The philosophy behind this opulence was explicit. For the price of admission, working-class Americans could experience luxury they would never otherwise afford. Theater owners called it democratic luxury, the idea that movies could provide a temporary escape from the grinding realities of industrial life. For a few hours, a factory worker could sit in a velvet seat beneath a crystal chandelier and pretend to be a king. The theaters even had names designed to evoke fantasy: the Majestic, the Imperial, the Paradise, the Dreamland. These were not mere buildings. They were portals to another world. The economics of moviegoing in 1920 reveal a world vastly different from our own. A ticket to a first-run picture palace might cost between 10 and 50 cents, the equivalent of roughly $1 to $6 today. For comparison, the average worker earned about 25 cents per hour. This pricing created a hierarchy of cinema experience. The grandest picture palaces in major cities charged the highest prices and showed films first. Smaller neighborhood theaters charged less and received films weeks or months later. The cheapest venues, remnants of the Nickelodeon era, charged just 5 cents and showed films that had already completed their runs everywhere else. Different sections of the same theater commanded different prices. Orchestra seats, the best views on the main floor, cost the most. Balcony seats were cheaper, but required climbing stairs. Some theaters maintained separate entrances and sections for black patrons, charging them the same prices for inferior seats in segregated balconies. The ticket itself was often a small work of art, printed on heavy paper, sometimes featuring images from current films or elaborate decorative borders. Tickets served as souvenirs that patrons would save and collect. Children who could not afford admission would sometimes hang around theater exits, hoping to receive stubs from departing patrons as proof they had seen the show. What you received for your admission was substantial by modern standards. A typical evening program lasted 3 to 4 hours and included not just the main feature, but also a comedy short, a serial episode, and sometimes a live stage show. You could arrive whenever you wanted and stay as long as you liked. There were no fixed show times, no one checking whether you had sat through multiple screenings. The music that made movies move. The most profound difference between cinema then and now was sound, or rather, its source. Silent films were never meant to be watched in silence. They were always accompanied by live music, and that music transformed the viewing experience entirely. In the smallest theaters, a single pianist sat before the screen, improvising accompaniment based on the action. These pianists were remarkable musicians who could shift from romantic melodies during love scenes to thundering chords during action sequences without missing a beat. They played for hours at a time, often performing the same film multiple times per day, developing an intimate knowledge of every scene and every emotion. Larger theaters employed orchestras of varying sizes. A medium-sized picture palace might have 10 to 15 musicians. The grandest venues employed full orchestras of 50 players or more. The Chicago Theater's orchestra was so renowned that audiences attended as much for the music as for the films themselves. By 1920, film studios had begun providing cue sheets, detailed instructions indicating what type of music should accompany each scene. A cue sheet might specify mysterious music for a suspense sequence, agitato for a chase scene, or a specific popular song for a romantic moment. Publishers produced volumes of photoplay music, short pieces composed specifically for common film situations. The villain's entrance, the hero's triumph, the tearful reunion. The most prestigious films received fully composed original scores. When D.W. Griffith's epic, The Birth of a Nation, premiered in 19, it was accompanied by a specially commissioned orchestral score performed by a 40-piece orchestra. This tradition continued into the 20s, with major productions receiving original music that elevated them from entertainment to art. But the music served a practical purpose as well. Early projectors were noisy machines that clattered and whirred throughout screenings. Music masked these mechanical sounds, allowing audiences to immerse themselves in the images on screen. Without accompaniment, the magic of cinema would have been drowned out by the machinery that made it possible. Watching a film in 1920 was not the passive, solitary experience we know today. It was communal, vocal, and sometimes chaotic. Audiences talked during screenings, not whispered conversations, but full-voiced commentary on the action. When a villain appeared, audiences booed and hissed. When a hero escaped danger, they cheered. When lovers finally kissed, they sighed collectively. But when you like and subscribe to the channel, people go crazy. The theater was a space for shared emotional response, not silent contemplation. Title cards, the text screens that conveyed dialogue and narration created their own rhythm. When a card appeared, a murmur would pass through the audience as literate patrons read aloud for those who could not. In immigrant neighborhoods, someone might translate the English text into Italian, Yiddish, or Polish. The entire audience would pause, absorb the words, and then return their attention to the action. Children were particularly vocal participants. Saturday matinees drew thousands of young viewers who responded to every moment with unrestrained enthusiasm. Theater owners developed strategies for managing these crowds. Some hired matron supervisors specifically for children's screenings. Others simply accepted the chaos as part of the business. The physical environment contributed to the sensory experience. Picture palaces were not air-conditioned that. Technology would not become common until the late 1920s. Summer screenings meant open windows, worry fans, and the mingling of street noise with musical accompaniment. Winter screenings meant heavy coats piled on seats, and the warmth of bodies packed closely together. Smoking was permitted in most theaters. The air filled with cigarette and cigar smoke, creating a haze that caught the projector S-beam and made the light itself, visible, column of illumination, cutting through the darkness to meet the screen. This effect, accidental as it was, became part of the cinema's visual poetry. By 1920, the film industry had created something unprecedented in human history. Celebrities known by sight to millions of people who would never meet them. The star system had emerged just a decade earlier. Before 1910, film studios did not publicize actors' names, fearing that famous performers would demand higher salaries. Audiences identified their favorites by nicknames: the Biograph Girl, the Vitagraph Girl, Little Mary. But public demand proved overwhelming, and studios capitulated. By 1920, movie stars were among the most famous people on Earth. Charlie Chaplin's face was recognized on every continent. His Little Tramp character, the bowler hat, the cane, the mustache, the shuffling walk, had become a universal symbol of comedy and pathos. Chaplin commanded $1 million per film, making him one of the highest-paid people in the world. Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart, drew audiences through sheer force of personality. Though she was nearly 30 in 1920, she continued playing young girls in films like Pollyanna and Little Lord Fauntleroy. Her curls, her dimples, her ability to convey emotion without words made her the most beloved woman in America. Douglas Fairbanks embodied athletic masculinity in adventure films that featured his acrobatic stunts. Buster Keaton performed comedy, with a stone-faced expression that made his physical genius even more remarkable. Rudolph Valentino, though his greatest fame lay just ahead, was already causing women to swoon with his smoldering intensity. These stars existed in a curious relationship with their audiences. Fans felt they knew them intimately. Their faces appeared in newspapers, yet they remained fundamentally mysterious. Without recorded voices, without synchronized sound, they communicated only through gesture, expression, and the projection of pure visual presence. The silence of silent film created a peculiar intimacy. Audiences projected their own voices, their own personalities, onto these figures. Every viewer heard Chaplin speak in their own mind's voice. Every viewer imagined Pickford's laughter according to their own conception. The stars belonged to everyone because they belonged to no one. Silent filmmakers developed a visual vocabulary so sophisticated that their techniques remain foundational to cinema today. Without dialogue, they had to tell stories purely through images and, in doing so, they discovered the true language of film. Close-ups revealed emotion in ways theater never could. When the camera moved in on an actor's face, filling the screen with their eyes, their trembling lips, audiences experienced intimacy impossible in any other medium. D.W. Griffith, the most influential director of the era, pioneered this technique. Understanding that cinema as power lay in its ability to show what the human eye could see up close. Cross-cutting, alternating between simultaneous actions in different locations created suspense that left audiences gasping. A hero racing to rescue a heroine, while danger approached from another direction. The film cutting back and forth between them generated tension that words could never match. This technique, primitive though it seems today, was revolutionary in 19. German expressionist filmmakers pushed visual storytelling further still. Films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, released in 1920, used distorted sets, exaggerated shadows, and impossible angles to externalize psychological states. The sets themselves told stories. A twisted staircase suggested madness. A looming shadow implied threat. These techniques would influence filmmakers for the next century. Actors, too, developed specialized skills for the silent screen. Stage acting broad gestures, exaggerated expressions looked ridiculous when captured by the camera. Film acting required subtlety, stillness, the ability to convey volumes with a glance. The greatest silent film actors understood that less was more, that the camera magnified everything, that restraint was more powerful than excess. Title cards punctuated the action, but the best filmmakers used them sparingly. A truly great silent film could be understood with no text, that all the images told a complete story. This discipline forced filmmakers to think visually first, to construct narratives that transcended language. It was, in many ways, the purest form of cinema. A visit to the cinema in 1920 meant far more than simply watching a single film. Just as your like means a lot to the channel, your comment is every show taught us. The complete program was a variety show that could last most of an evening. The newsreel came first, short films documenting current events from around the world. In an era before television, newsreels provided the only moving images of distant happenings. Audiences watched footage of political leaders, natural disasters, sporting events, and human interest stories. For many viewers, newsreels offered their only glimpse of life beyond their own neighborhoods. Comedy shorts followed one or two reels, featuring comedians in brief, self-contained adventures. These shorts served as testing grounds for new talent, and as reliable crowd pleasers between heavier programming. A Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton short could brighten any program, no matter what feature followed. Serials kept audiences returning week after week. These multi-chapter adventure stories ended each episode with a cliffhanger, the hero in mortal danger, the mystery unsolved, the villain triumphant. Titles like The Perils of Pauline and The Exploits of Elaine created loyal followings who would return every week to see how the story continued. Live entertainment often accompanied the filmed program. Singers might perform between reels. Stage shows featuring dancers, acrobats, or comedians might precede the main feature. The boundaries between film and live performance remained fluid. The theater was still a theater, a space for entertainment of all kinds. Finally came the feature presentation, the main attraction that drew audiences to this particular theater on this particular night. By 1920, feature films typically ran between 60 and 90 minutes. Though epics could stretch to 3 hours or more, the feature was the culmination of the evening. The reason for the visit, the experience that patrons would discuss with friends and family in the days to come. When the feature ended, you could stay. There was no one sweeping you out for the next showing. Watch it again, if you liked. Some patrons spent entire afternoons in the theater, watching the complete program multiple times, escaping the heat of summer or the cold of winter into the permanent twilight of the cinema. What audiences in 1920 could not know was that they were witnessing the twilight of an art form. The silent film era had less than a decade remaining, and its end would come with stunning sound. Throughout the 1920s, inventors and studios experimented with synchronized sound. Various systems spun a film, Movietone, Vitaphone promised to unite image and voice. Most industry experts dismissed these efforts. Sound was a gimmick, they said. Audiences loved silence films. Why change what worked? Then, in October 1927, Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer. It was not the first sound film, but it was the first to demonstrate sound's commercial potential. When Al Jolson looked at the camera and spoke, "Wait a minute, wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet." The silent era received its death sentence. The transition was brutal and swift. By 1930, silent film production had essentially ceased in Hollywood. Theaters scrambled to install sound equipment. Musicians who had spent their careers accompanying films found themselves unemployed overnight. An estimated 20,000 theater musicians lost their jobs within 2 years. Some silent film stars successfully transitioned to sound. Others were destroyed by it. John Gilbert, one of the great romantic leads of the silent era, saw his career collapse when audiences rejected his voice as insufficiently masculine. Foreign stars, whose accented English had been invisible in silent films, suddenly sounded wrong to American ears. The picture palaces survived, adapted for sound, and many continue operating today. But something was lost in the transition to live music, the communal experience, the projection of imagination onto silent faces. The movies became louder, but in some ways, they became smaller. Those who experienced cinema in 1920 witnessed something that can never exist again. Not because we lacked the technology, but because we lacked the innocence. We cannot unhear sound. We cannot return to the silence. The picture palaces of 1920 still stand in cities across America, some restored to their original grandeur. Others converted to other purposes, many demolished to make way for progress. When you walk through their lobbies today, when you sit in their velvet seats beneath their painted ceilings, you are occupying the same space where audiences once gathered to watch shadows dance in silence, but you cannot truly experience what they experienced. The pianist is gone. The orchestra is silent. The communal reading of title cards, the collective gasp at the villain's entrance, the shared tears at the lover's reunion. All of this exists now only in memory and imagination. Silent cinema was not primitive. It was different. It asked more of its audiences, more imagination, more engagement, more willingness to participate in the creation of meaning. The images on screen were incomplete without the music that accompanied them, without the responses of fellow viewers, without the mental voices each audience member provided for the silent stars. When sound arrived, cinema became more realistic, but it also became more passive. The audience no longer had to participate. A film did everything for them. The voices they had imagined were replaced by recorded voices. The music they had heard live was replaced by recorded music. The communal experience became individual, then increasingly isolated. Perhaps this is simply progress. Perhaps sound cinema is better than silent cinema in every way that matters. But something was lost in 19... For a brief moment in human history, millions of people gathered in palace-like theaters to watch dreams projected in light and silence. They provided the voices, they provided the sounds, they created the experience together. That moment is gone, but the buildings remain. The films survive. And if you sit quietly in an old picture palace, you can almost hear the music that once filled the darkness. If this journey into the lost world of silent cinema fascinated you, if you found yourself wondering what it would have been like to sit in those velvet seats, to hear that live orchestra, to watch those silent stars, then you understand why history matters. We preserve the past, not because it was better, but because it was different. Because understanding how people once lived, once dreamed, once entertained themselves, helps us understand ourselves. Subscribe to continue exploring forgotten chapters of history. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new journey into the past. Leave a comment telling us your favorite silent film or which era of entertainment history you want us to investigate next. Share this video with someone who loves movies. Thank you for watching. Until next time.